Hi there, and welcome to another episode of 401 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. I'm Justin, and I've wanted to do this episode for a very long time. Now, you know we cover a little bit of everything on this channel regarding pop culture, but I think most of you know that my personal favorite is always anything from the horror genre. And with the very sad and recent passing of Shelley Duvall, I knew that it was time to finally get my thoughts out on this topic regarding Shelley Duvall and The Shining. The Shining was a horror movie that was introduced to me by my dad. He was always a very big fan of Jack Nicholson, and I don't think that I saw the whole movie all at once when I was young, but I do remember that the whole bathroom sequence I did see, and it was very iconic, and it definitely stuck with me throughout the years until I actually did finally get to see the entire movie when I was probably about 12 or 13. And The Shining was a great choice for me, even at a younger age, because when I was a kid, Popeye was one of my favorite movies growing up. Even without knowing anything about performances or the craft of filmmaking at that age, I knew that I loved Shelley Duvall as Olive Oyl. And like I said, I did not see the entire movie the first time my dad showed it to me. I was probably about 12 or so when I really did sit down and watch it. But even at that young of an age, before I saw it in its entirety, I knew that what Shelley Duvall did was very authentic because it scared me and I was scared for her and it remained with me. And yes, I know that Shelley Duvall's portrayal was not the exact character written in Stephen King's 1977 novel. Yes, I believe that version of the character was fully realized by the incredibly talented Rebecca De Mornay in the 1997 adaptation, which I think is a great adaptation, even if the special effects are outdated now. And although I loved Rebecca De Mornay and the novel's character, I think a lot gets overlooked, no pun intended, with Shelley Duvall's performance of Wendy Torrance. Spoilers ahead. To be clear, I think that there has been plenty covered on Shelley Duvall's experience on The Shining with director Stanley Kubrick, and I believe that there are also a lot of fans of her portrayal. There are also a lot that laugh at it, or show disgust at it, or think she is just a whiny character, which I think is also because people like to repeat what they think is a so-called popular opinion. But, and I know that Stephen King would disagree, I think that Duvall's performance actually captured quite a bit regarding the essence of Wendy Torrance. I love Stephen King, both as a writer, and I think he is an amazing human in general. And although Duvall was not the stereotypical cheerleader image that King created, I think her Wendy is not only fascinating and relatable, but incredibly brave and an amazing mother. She is also deeply flawed, and for too long has convinced herself that everything will work out regarding loving her husband. Nevertheless, once put to the test, Duvall's Wendy is incredibly brave. To be brave. This is one of the main points that I hope to make with this episode. What it is to be brave? I think most people, well into adulthood, have this childish notion that brave means to have no fear, or that you are afraid of nothing. But if you are not afraid of anything, then how can you be brave? There is no challenge then. You can do things considered brave, of course, but at the core, it's easy for you. You just did it as an action. There was no risk. I think that to be brave, there is a necessary component of some risk at play, therefore, an element of fear, and then needing to overcome fear and then still take action. I believe that bravery, real courage, comes from having real fear and, despite that fear, overcoming it. Yes, Shelley Duvall's Wendy is overwrought, high strung, and even a bit of a doormat to Jack Nicholson's portrayal of her husband Jack. And it is because of these features, Duvall's Wendy ends up being incredibly brave and strong, which, at the essence, is Wendy from the novel. Wendy in the novel is described as a blonde and beautiful woman. She has a strained relationship with her mother and is bitter towards Jack, unafraid of reminding Jack what he did to Danny while drinking. She has a lot of common sense and intelligence. Note here, there are critics that say Duvall's Wendy does not demonstrate a lot of common sense and is weak. I have a lot to say about this. Now, yes, Shelley Duvall is clearly not blonde, and her Wendy is more emotional during confrontations. Like I said, a lot has already been covered on how the relationship between Stanley Kubrick and Shelley Duvall was not good. So, question. Did Stanley make Shelley change her performance to be more emotional instead of confrontational, and is that where the friction began? If you look at Duvall's performance in movies such as Three Women, or even Popeye, Duvall did not have any issues in playing stronger, attractive, or independent characters. Based on comments Stephen King has made, Shelley's portrayal was one of his bigger issues with Kubrick's adaptation, and it has been well documented that Kubrick and Duvall's relationship was awful. After watching various documentaries, I have noticed that often, when scenes are being shown of what Kubrick is removing or changing in his script, it often seems to be stuff related to the character of Wendy. I don't know what his motivation was. Maybe it was his relationship with Duvall, maybe not. Maybe he wanted Wendy to better reflect a character showing fear for the audience. But I think that these changes led to confusion for Duvall on the character she was trying to perform, as I think she also saw Wendy as the strong woman from the novel. I wasn't there, and neither person involved can be asked now, but I have a feeling that a lot of their friction came from the changes to Wendy's character, as the original screenwriter, Diane Johnson, can be seen in documentaries saying that Wendy was originally closer to the novel. Now, Wendy in the movie. Other than being blonde, I think that Duvall plays Wendy with a lot of intelligence. Someone can be both emotional and intelligent. People can be more than one thing. Duvall's Wendy is very caring for her son and is shown to be incredibly capable, as she is the one primarily taking care of the hotel. She is also adventurous to entertain her son by trying out the hotel's maze. But first, I think we have to ask, was she a victim of Jack's violence too before the hotel? There is no on screen evidence that Jack hurt Wendy before the events at the Overlook Hotel. However, the scenes with Wendy and Jack often show Wendy in a reactionary position, as if she has to constantly be on guard with Jack. I do not profess to be an expert of domestic violence, but trust me, I have seen it in real life. A lot. And speaking only from my experience, Duvall's Wendy has all the characteristics of one in this type of relationship. This might have been a hint at her insecurities working from her working relationship with the director, but Duvall's Wendy is always shown speaking in a manner that seeks approval from her husband. At the same time, when around strangers, she starts to come alive, but in a way that is almost as if she has to put a show on for Jack, like a justification for why he chose her. Still, it is always cautious. For example, when she meets the hotel staff, it's as if it were Jack's job as the husband to get the employment, but her job as the wife to entertain them by being overly curious about the history and everything Stuart Altman has to say, while at the same time looking back at Jack to make sure she has not stepped out of line in any way. Also, it comes off as a desperate plea to Jack to help show the world that they are a great couple. This comes to a head when Wendy innocently checks in on Jack to see how the novel is going. He quickly rips the paper out of the typewriter and unleashes on her a verbal assault. This, of course, being the act of someone with something to hide, as Jack has not only been skirting his duties at the hotel, because again, Wendy has been doing everything. Jack is no longer writing a novel, just an endless cycle of the same repeated phrase. Although the scene does not get physical, Wendy's frozen reaction is one that reminds the audience of someone who has learned their lesson well in the past. Helpless, terrified, make no sudden movements. This gives the impression of a woman that knows this man will hurt her. Or one can infer this is because he has done it before. She does not respond with any sort of, "Who do you think you're talking to?" or "Watch your tone with me, mister." She is silent until he demands an answer which she quietly gives. Or later, when Danny asks to get a toy from their room, she warns Danny to be incredibly quiet, and it is a warning. It's not a recommendation. It's not a casual remark. Even though in the moment they are far from the room, she is speaking low and direct to her son. If she really believed that her husband has changed, as she tells the doctor early in the film, she would not be so worried at Jack accidentally being woken from a nap. This is someone that is terrified of her husband. She allows Danny to go because she knows that his request should not be that big of a deal. And she wants to believe that her family situation is still a good one, as victims of domestic violence often do as a way to survive and remain. But she knows that the simple act of speaking above a whisper or walking with more force than a tiptoe could be life or death in this family. Comfort. People will often stay in awful situations just because they believe they're comfortable. There have been endless studies on what people will endure just because they have the illusion of being comfortable. It is the incredibly naive question that people ask regarding why people will stay in situations of domestic violence. The answer is simple. Most people find it difficult to risk leaving the comforts of what they believe as a stable situation, or the biggest of all, the comfort of what is normal to them. People get used to something, and they can think, well, I know what to expect here versus the unknown, because the unknown can be the biggest fear. They think, well, I know I can survive this so far. They also want to keep the illusion that love will conquer all, and eventually the other person will change. It is the easiest thing in the world to say about someone else that their situation is bad. But when you are living in that situation, it is incredibly difficult to get perspective, especially when it is your own mind working against you, let alone the false promises said to you by someone you love. If you have not gone through a situation like that, then you should consider yourself incredibly lucky that you cannot even grasp that concept. Maybe give it some thought. But once Danny is injured by an unknown force, everything changes for Wendy, and she becomes incredibly brave. For Duvall's Wendy, she is coming to this conclusion before the hotel and Jack start to full on attack that she is going to have to leave the comfort of her normalcy. After Danny comes to her with bruises, her only thought is to get him to a doctor, which shows what an amazing mother she is. The bravery is that Duvall's Wendy is willing to stand up to Jack when she has not been able to previously. She is willing to risk the unknown and shatter her comfortable illusions. Wendy wants Jack to come with them, which is a subconscious effort to keep her normalcy and hope alive that maybe their family is a good situation. Again, people in situations of domestic violence will often rather have the norm of living in fear rather than facing the fear of the unknown. But her first step is that she has stood up finally to her husband to protect her child, which is exactly what a good mother would do. Duvall's Wendy is by no means perfect, but she will be brave enough to have her child survive no matter what. Before this moment, she thought that meant keeping the family together. Now she realizes it means something different. Before that moment, though, yes, she did what she had to do to keep her family surviving. She does not mention having any obvious tech skills, but let's look at the fact that Duvall's Wendy is the one clearly keeping the hotel maintained, doing Jack's actual job. He is writing a non novel, as we come to find out, while the rest of the time is either sleeping or throwing a ball around the hotel. She is checking the boiler. She is making sure the radio equipment works. She is cooking meals and checking weather reports. Thus, Duvall's Wendy is shown to be a very capable person. She has done what she had to do, without thought, which can be brave. But even more brave is when Duvall's Wendy makes the choice that she and Danny are leaving no matter what. Wendy is also incredibly resourceful. Even though Jack has not lost it completely yet, she knows she has to confront him. We see her running through her ideas out loud. She is figuring out a smart plan. She tells Danny that she is going to talk to Dad and to stay in the room. Then, without letting Danny see, she grabs the baseball bat to take with her for her talk with Jack. Duvall's Wendy is definitely not stupid. She knows there is a good chance she will need protection. Later on, she makes sure that even though Jack is locked up, Wendy takes a knife with her to the room, which will indeed save her life. But first, let's talk about the confrontation. On the surface, one of the scenes that people will use as evidence of Duvall's Wendy being weak. I believe it is the complete opposite. She sees what Jack has been writing and it terrifies her. Rightly so. Then, her husband surprises her and is incredibly threatening. She begins to cry, which is a part of the criticism of Duvall's portrayal, but I think it does the complete opposite. I think it shows how courageous she is. It can be very overwhelming to have to fight when you are not a fighter, but she does. Tears do not automatically mean weakness. Sometimes they cannot be helped. Jack mocks Wendy and she says that she is confused. But is she? It seems to me that she is very intelligently keeping this man talking in order to formulate a plan of escape. Escape from this situation in an isolated hotel during a winter storm when her child is vulnerable in their room upstairs. She keeps him talking. Maybe she is confused, but that does not negate the fact that her instincts keep him talking. The fact that she is obviously sobbing, petrified, and almost helpless does not stop her from realizing that she is under attack. People seem to always have a comment on what they would do in a scary situation. But, by definition, a scary situation has unknown factors and people do not behave as they normally would when scared. Wendy, when scared, fights back. As they inch up the stairs and she is being backed into a metaphoric corner, she fights him. After all this incredibly believable emotion, or in spite of it, for those that have an issue with emotions, she swings the bat and takes him down. The fact that she was sobbing the whole time does not make what she does any less brave. I believe it makes her more so. Her whole world is crumbling, and to not be emotional about it would be unbelievable to me. Other people might react differently, and that is fine, but I can completely understand her devastation, and I can understand and believe how strong she is at the same time. People can be more than one thing at one time. And then she also manages to drag her husband to the kitchen and lock him in the pantry. She has a human moment with the lock, but she figures it out. When everything hits the fan, she knows she needs to get Danny down to Sidewinder, and is more than willing to take a risk to her own life to get him there. But Jack has destroyed the snowcat and the radio, which are their only chances of reasonable escape. For the first time, she chooses sleep to deal with it all, at least until she can decide another course of action. This is an incredibly human thing to do. But when she is woken by her son, she moves right into action to protect him. And, being incredibly resourceful, even as Jack is axing the entry door, she does not forget the knife. In the bathroom, she makes sure her child is safe. Duvall's Wendy is of course terrified and screaming. Again, this demonstrates bravery. There has to be fear that needs to be overcome. The fact that she is obviously filled with fear and still fights back demonstrates this. Jack is surprised again and again by his wife. He thought it would be nothing to take her down, and Wendy proves him wrong yet again. Afterwards, she is confronted by one horrifying vision after another, but still she goes on. Jack could be anywhere. The ghost could be anywhere. Duvall's Wendy will and does brave any of these situations until she finds her son or dies trying. At the conclusion, without question, she hops right into the snowcat machine with Danny. But before this, she has been willing to leave the comfort of the hotel. She has been willing to leave the comfort of the life she has known. She has stood up to Jack. She has stood up to the hotel's ghost. Yes, she has done this all while sobbing and full of fear, but each time, Duvall's Wendy has persisted and persevered. There is also the deleted ending, which, again, was it taken out in part because it showed Wendy being thoughtful? Essentially, Stuart Allman comes to the hospital to see her and Danny. He offers her his apologies and a place to stay. But Duvall's Wendy does not just fall into Allman's lap. She does not answer because she's going to think about it first. To me, this all more than successfully demonstrates what a strong and heroic person Duvall's Wendy is in The Shining. She might do it through tears or surprised confusion, but with each action she takes, she manages to make sure her son is safe. Especially because this was her first real test. Before this, she was a housewife who just wanted to make sure her husband and child were happy. But once she realized her husband was more than just a threat to her child, Duvall's Wendy fought again and again until Danny was safe. In the documentary Superior Firepower, The Making of Aliens, Sigourney Weaver discusses the bravery of Ellen Ripley. People think of Ellen Ripley as a brave character, but many writers then have this impulse to make the character this hardened gym teacher yelling, "Come on, troops, move, move, move." But Sigourney points out that this is not Ellen Ripley at all. And it's true. Just because someone is loud and borderline militant does not equate to brave. Ellen Ripley is brave because she is terrified but keeps going and doing what she has to do to survive. But people do tend to get this childish image in their head of what a brave person looks like. Wendy Torrance from the novel is not like some headstrong gym teacher either, but she is very brave. And so is Shelley Duvall's portrayal of Wendy. She does it from a much more emotionally charged place, tears streaming, but she does it. And it's all the more compelling because in real life, Shelley Duvall had to be brave. Her relationship with Stanley Kubrick has been well documented, and I wasn't there. I'm not going to take sides on which side I think was right or wrong. I think it's all out there on footage and we can see it for ourselves, but I wasn't there. I wasn't even born yet. But I will say that to be an actress in a different country working with a director that really didn't support you is pretty brave. Even Jack Nicholson has said in interviews that he had a very wonderful experience working with Stanley Kubrick, but he noted that his experience was very different than Shelley Duvall. So for her to complete the film, to continue on with a director who never really seemed satisfied with what she was doing one way or the other, I think is incredibly brave. And I think that Shelley Duvall really did bring a lot to the character of Wendy. I get it. It's hard, you do see her sobbing and confused a lot. But again, I think that in order to be brave, you have to first be afraid. And I think that she is very afraid. But I also think that there are tons of scenes where you see her taking care of the boiler, making sure the hotel's still running, doing all these things. And through each moment, she comes out on top. She might do it through tears, but she comes out on top. And I really think that Shelley Duvall's performance in The Shining should really get a second glance from people and maybe a new appreciation. But it is obviously a great loss. Shelley Duvall's life, she has done some amazing work, and I'm grateful that we will always have it. I was a big fan of like fairy tale theater growing up. Obviously, The Shining, obviously Popeye, Roxanne. Anything I saw Shelley Duvall in, I was always very happy to see, and I'm very sad we won't see it again, like many, many people, I'm sure. But, well, thanks again for watching this episode. I hope it makes sense where I was coming from. I just really love Shelley Duvall's performance in The Shining, and I think people should give it a second look. But what do you all think? Thanks again for watching. Have a good one.